Joining us this week is our good friend Karl Moore, an associate professor at the Desautels Faculty of Management, one of the world's top international schools of business at McGill University in Montreal. It is so good to see you again.
Tom, it's been a few years. It's good to be back, I must say.
It has been a few years. This is the first time we've been able to get together since the pandemic. And we should mention right off the top, you are now a member of our Board of Trustees here at Mountain Lake PBS, one of the new Canadian members from Montreal, which we appreciate. We've enjoyed having you stop by to talk about some of the great trips that you and your students at McGill have taken over the past decade to learn about some of the emerging markets and economies around the world. After taking time off because of the pandemic, you headed overseas this year, taking students to the west coast of Africa, to Ghana and the Ivory Coast. What was it about those two countries in particular that were appealing, and why did you choose to go there?
Well, part of it is that Africa has been something where it's been in the news. There's been 3 covers of The Economist about Africa over the last 7 or 8 years sort of thing. When we think of the future of the world, Africa plays an important part because of the demographics. They have a lot of young people there, dramatically more, something like 30 of the youngest countries in the world are in Africa. Africa also has minerals. Things like when we have our electric cars, you need things that come to considerably good from Africa. So there's an important set of resources there. As well, in Canada and the US, we tend to be too much about me, the great I, where in Africa it's more about community and we. Partly it's because of low incomes and other reasons, but it's something where we noticed in West Africa more of a sense of community and at times a sense of joy and a sense of laughter that we kind of look at and go, there's a simplicity there and a beauty to it that we can learn from.
And the economies are booming there?
Yeah, they're doing very well. Now, there's ups and downs. There's some, interest rates going up, some issues there. We met with the head of the Bank of Ghana, who's a McGill PhD grad in economics, a small world indeed. And they're wrestling with certain things there, but there's some underlying things which are quite positive.
And not seeing the global inflation that the US, Canada, and other countries are
Well, they
seeing.
are to some degree. I mean, they sell cocoa, the biggest suppliers of cocoa to the world. We went to a plantation where they did rubber. They had rubber trees, cocoa, black pepper, and coconuts. And it was quite interesting. And a number of the students said they didn't know rubber came from trees, which I guess I knew, but I'd never seen it. It was quite intriguing to see how it does and how you actually get it, and we're not sure how it becomes tires, but it's a wonderful process.
Many of our viewers know you as a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and for a number of years you have hosted the CEO series on CJAD Radio in Montreal, our friends.
Well, it's across Canada now.
And all across.
Recently
right?
Across Canada, so we're quite delighted by that.
Fantastic.
For sure.
And you interview top business and political leaders, movers and shakers from across Canada and around the world, really. And there was a leader in Africa that you interviewed while you were there.
Well, we interviewed 3 or 4 African, we sat down and talked to many of them. And a couple of them just interviewed right there because they were such important figures. One was a McGill grad who's a fashion maven that's taking West African fashion all around the world. Well, we did another one, which was one of our MBA. She's an MBA law and psychology grad from McGill, grew up in the West Island of Montreal, and started a company that uses bugs for food. And she moved to Ghana about 4 years ago, won the Halt Prize with 4 other MBAs, and it was just great. And I have Shobita come to class in person when she's visiting family in Montreal. Just a great story.
Fantastic. And folks here in the States, they can, if they don't hear, if they're not in the Plattsburgh area, can't hear it on CJAD, of course, they can go online and listen to your CEO.
It becomes a
there.
podcast on Monday. Now, intriguing thing, Tom, is that younger people say, "Oh, Karl, you have a podcast. That's great." Where I go, "I have a national radio show. That's cooler." And they don't but older people go, yeah. There's only like 30 or 40 people in Canada to do that. You and your dog can have a podcast and probably do, so many people. But it's something where I've pretty much given up that battle and say, yes, it's a podcast as well.
Yes, but that is cool to have a national
syndicated. I'm glad you recognize it at least.
Radio program, yes. You've also written a number of books, latest out just within the past week on a topic you've touched on before, the often talked about generational divide between boomers and millennials and Gen Zers, and you're focusing on that. It's really changing the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I've been asking CEOs for the last few years, as I've been working on the book, is Generation Z different? And if you look at Bombardier, 15,000 people, or CGI, about 70,000 people, they would have thousands of Gen Zs. So one of your questions is, how do I deal effectively with them? It is something what we're wrestling with. So what I'm arguing in the book, Tom, is this in one sentence. People over 45 with a degree were taught a modern worldview. People under 35 with a degree were taught a postmodern worldview, comma, therefore must be managed differently. Second sentence, and this book has 5 short chapters on how to do that on a practical level. It's saying is that in a world of change, older people have got to recognize that they're outdated in some of their thinking. But as you get older, over 45 and 50, you got to say, I'm wrong more than I used to be because the world's changed more than it used to be. So one interesting thing came out of that is that I set up a couple weeks ago my woke council for the year. So I used to call it politically correct, but it's kind of evolved to woke. And I realize in the US woke is a loaded word. What I mean by it is being respectful of people we didn't respect enough in the past. So people of color, women, and so on. And when you take it from that viewpoint, most people agree that's fine. And it goes on a lot of other things, but what I ask them to do is say, when I say something dated or inappropriate, let me know. And so they do, and they travel with me. One's a producer of my radio show and so on. And and I don't say things where they have to stop the meeting and say that's totally wrong. Nothing that bad, but it's just saying you just don't say that anymore. Or if you say this, Indigenous people might take it inappropriately. And you go, that's a good point. And I want to show respect for those people, so I'll no longer say that. So they keep me up to date. And what I argue for people that are in management, if you're over 40, I guess we didn't trust people over 30 back in the day, but if you're over 40, you need to be reverse mentored by Gen Zs. And what that means is that when I say to my students, 30% of the time you're reverse mentoring me, you're teaching me. Now I have a couple older mentors, this thought does not generally occur to them, that they should ask my advice. But it's something where 30% of the time you're teaching me, like my counsel that advises me on my use of languages and things I'm doing. Now I do remind my students that 70% of the time I'm mentoring you, and don't forget that. So it's a two-way street, but what is new is that I'm going to learn a lot from young people because I want to be up to date. So there's an evolution of we're more learning from young people and they have much to teach us. There's just an evolution of hierarchy, truth, and knowledge, and it's more nuanced than it was when we were young. See, young people don't want to work for you if you don't listen to them. You're a jerk if you don't listen. So it's something where you'll be a better leader. They're more apt to work for you and stay with you, and you're going to get better strategy from it.
We always like to get your thoughts on U.S.-Canada trade and relations. Joe Biden just this past week announcing he plans to run for re-election in 2024. He was up in Ottawa about a month ago, a quick one-day trip north of the border. A number of items on the agenda for his meeting with the Prime Minister, growing concerns over China. The two also formally announced a new immigration deal that in effect closes non-traditional border crossings like Roxham Road that tens of thousands of migrants and asylum seekers have used in recent years to enter Canada. That route, of course, here in northern New York, now shut down, many of those migrants now being returned to the U.S. Was there growing pressure on Justin Trudeau to close this route? Did many in Quebec feel that too many migrants have been entering Canada seeking asylum and that really the government was being overextended?
Yeah, that was the feeling for it. So they want to control that more. Genuinely across Canada, we want more immigrants at the federal level. We need them. And part of it is that in a world of climate change, it seems like we're going to have longer growing seasons. We also have a quarter of the world's water, fresh water in Canada, and the world's going to become increasingly thirsty. So it's something that Canada has these great opportunities, and we're kind of sorting out what is the right approach to it. What do we do?
Since we last saw you, Quebec and New York State are partnering together now on a new multi-billion-dollar deal to buy hydropower that will be delivered by a 300-mile power cord that will run under Lake Champlain down the Hudson River, power 1 million homes in metropolitan New York within the next few years. A major deal for Quebec. Premier Legault sending out a tweet saying it's a 25-year contract worth about $20 billion Canadian. One of the biggest contracts ever for Hydro-Quebec. Pretty major deal.
It's great because we can produce some of the cleanest power in the world and use it and sell it to our American friends, making a lot of money, but also providing you clean power. So it's something where going forward, this is great. and we should continue to grow that, but do it in a way that's respectful of the Indigenous nations that own the land. And that's kind of what we're doing across Canada, is sorting that out, and it's an ongoing process.
And part of this deal includes the Mohawks, Kahnawake Mohawks, being part of this deal, benefiting from this huge hydro deal that passes through their land,
Yeah.
and what many say is one of the first steps to include them in the deal and to try to repair those relations.
We're learning how to do it appropriately, and I think the Canadian government and the Parliament has come to terms with that, and they're doing better than they have in the past, but there's still a long way to go.
Karl Moore, always great to see you. Congratulations on the new book, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Always a pleasure, Tom.